Now, these are the descendants of Terah. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran was the father of Lot. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his birth, in Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she has no child. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the possessions that they had gathered, and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and invoked the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on by stages toward the Negev.
Thank you, Kristen. That's a lot of names and a lot of genealogy. And I know when we hear that kind of stuff, a lot of us are like, it's way too complicated. What do those names matter? What do those names mean? It's fascinating. I want you to know this. I am fascinated by some of the biblical genealogies, and I know that some of that puts you to sleep. But I love this story of Abram and Sarai, who were called by God to leave what they knew, and they left all of that family heritage, all of that genealogy, all of that stuff. They were called to leave that behind and go to something new. In Genesis chapter 11, chapter 12, we hear the call of Abram and Sarai. And Abram and Sarai are called to leave something and then to move into something new. That's not to say that they forget all that they've been, but they're called to go. In our sermon series in August here, we're going to think about the past and the present and the future of this congregation. And we're going to think about how our past and how our present shapes our own future. Yes, as a church, but individually. We are living the stories that we tell about ourselves. If you tell your child over and over and over again, you can do it. If you tell your child over and over and over again, you can do it. I'm proud of you. I believe in you. You know that child stands a little bit taller? As a coach, if you tell your players over and over and over again, not exclusively, right? Because there's some that just aren't necessarily skilled at basketball, so you can't just will a basketball to go into a hoop. But if you tell them over and over again, I believe in you, you can do it, that matters. It gives them confidence. We are living in the stories that we tell about ourselves. And so today, I'm going to try to unpack a little bit of the 50 years of this congregation. In the summer of 1971, these are some of the fashion designs from 1971. Some of you may remember them. And some of you probably have some of these garments yet in your closets, or you could find them at your local Goodwill. Some of you perhaps remember dressing like this. This is a picture of the toys that were popular in 1971. Does any of you recognize some of those, or remember some of those, or maybe some of you unpacked some of those as a child underneath the Christmas tree? 1971 was a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago at all, I mean. 1971 was a long time ago. If you want to know when your birthday was in 1971, you can look at this calendar. I did this math, it's not hard math. My dad turned 21 years old in 1971. He was here last Sunday, and some of you said, man, he's a really good preacher. That's always a tough thing for me, to have a good preacher come in. And then, but I'm really thankful that he was able to come and lead worship last Sunday. 1971 was an important and pivotal year. Let me just run through a couple of stats about cost, and a little bit about history, and then a little bit about what was popular at the time. At the year end, the Dow Jones Industrial Average ended at 890. Right? The average cost of a new house was $25,000. The average income per year was $10,600. Average monthly rent was $150. The cost of a gallon of gas was 40 cents. A Datsun 1200 Sport Coupe cost $1,826, and it only cost 8 cents to send a letter in the mail. Only cost 8 cents. A movie ticket cost $1.50, right? Many of you know the dates of the Vietnam War, 55 to 75 or so, depending on where exactly you hit that. But in 1971, more than 60% of the United States was opposed to the Vietnam War. In 1971, the 26th Amendment was ratified. Anybody know what the 26th Amendment was? Yeah, allowed you to be 18 and to vote, right? So those of you that are graduating high school soon, or around that age, we give thanks for that. Walt Disney World opened in October of 1971. And a new stock market index called the NASDAQ made its debut in 1971. National Public Radio gave its first broadcast in April of 1971. And a man named Fred Smith started a company known as FedEx back in 1971. Lots of people will, in the digital age especially, will point back to 1971 as the advent of the digital age. That 1971, the microprocessor was invented. Pocket calculator was invented by the Sharp Company, and email was first invented by Ray Tomlinson. The floppy disk was invented in 1971. Some popular films and popular musicians back in 1971, The Last Picture Show, Diamonds Are Forever, and The French Connection. Clockwork Orange, Fiddler on the Roof, and Dirty Harry all came out in 1971. These musicians, some of you know them, some of you have these albums today. James Taylor and The Doors and Bob Dylan and Janis Joplin and The Who and John Lennon and the Jackson 5 and Marvin Gaye and the Osmonds and the Rolling Stones. And these are popular TV shows back in 1971. All My Children and the Mary Tyler Moore Show and The Odd Couple and the Partridge Family all came about in 1971. The very first worship service for New Life Within Church happened on April 25th of 1971. And it happened, some of you know this. Do you know where it was? The very first church service was for New Life. It was held over at the Echo Valley Country Club. This is an interesting story. We live in the stories that we tell about ourselves. But around 1968 or so, there was a group of folks who were new members at the brand new Echo Valley Country Club. Some of you know the history of how Echo Valley Country Club started. Echo Valley started because there was a group of primarily Italians who didn't feel like they fit in up at a different country club, and so they started another country club where they felt like they could fit in. And so they started Echo Valley Country Club. In Echo Valley, there was a group of people, primarily card players, who knew that there was a new Lakewood development being planned around a brand new Lake Colchester. And they said, hey, that development, that place needs a place of Christian witness. That place needs that neighborhood needs a place that will love kids. That place needs that neighborhood needs a church to be a neighborhood church to a new community. And so out of a card club that went wrong, this church began. Sometime around 1968, 7 different Christian denominations were contacted to say, hey, will you help us begin a congregation? Of those 7 different Christian denominations, the Lutherans said, we'll try. And so the Lutherans gave a little bit of seed money, called a mission development pastor, Pastor John Rody, who was pastor here from June of 1971 until July of 1972. It's tough to be a mission development congregation or congregational pastor. But Pastor John Rody was the first pastor of this congregation, and the congregation was officially organized on June 20th of 1971. Started at this country club, moved to the vocal music room over at the Norwalk High School, and then in 1971, it had its first service here in 1972. Let me show you just a couple of pictures, because I love maps, and I love the stories that maps tell us. This is modern day Norwalk, you can see, and up in the red corner, that's the church, okay? And I am fascinated by, there's a website, the Iowa DNR has aerial views of the whole state of Iowa, and you can go back to 1930. This is what Norwalk looked like in 1930. From an aerial view. Now, I know that that's a little bit hard to see. You go home and check it out, because it's fascinating. And you can see the little bend in the road, that's Highway 28, or Sunset Drive, right, for us. And Old Norwalk is just to the south of that bend of the road at the bottom of the picture. Some of you are ringing some bells, and some of you are very confused by this, but I find it really, really fascinating. What you don't see there are golf courses. Echo Valley and Legacy have not been built yet. But you see a lot of farm field. Moving forward to 1950, you see a little bit more development and a little bit more homes. Then in 1970, you see the lake, and you see some of the Echo Valley is beginning to be built over on this side, the right side of the picture, and you can also see the town of Norwalk growing more and more back in 1970. This is a picture close up of the church building from 1970. This little tiny, they called it a chapel in the original documents, was built. Janice, you remember a lot of this history, and so many of you remember a lot of this history. If you look at old pictures of the first building of New Life Lutheran Church that started 50 years ago, it was built as if it would be, it could be converted back to a home. And I have to imagine that in some sense, it was built, that first building, which is that wing of the church over there, it was built as if it could be converted back to a home, so that, or just in case, if the congregation didn't survive, that they could sell the land and they could sell the building and and everybody could move on with their lives. I think that still permeates today for some of us. When we wonder if New Life Lutheran Church is going to survive. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary today, and I still think that sometimes people think, is this church going to survive, especially if we think past this past year and COVID, and we think, or we look through some of the pictorial directories of the congregation, we say, well, they left, and those are new families there, and those are new families there. But I still think there's some thought process in some of the stories that we tell ourselves. We wonder if we are going to survive. Which brings me to the story of Sarai and Abram. Because Sarai and Abram come from a long list, a long genealogy, a whole host of folks who have brought them to the place where they lived. And God calls Abram, and he says, you and your wife, I want you to go to a new place, and I want you to be a blessing to all of those that you encounter. And later on in the story, God says to Abram, your descendants are going to be so numerous that you can't even count them. They're going to be so numerous as the sand on the seashores, or they're going to be so numerous as the stars in the skies. Two different places we hear that pronouncement to Abram and Sarai. Here's the problem with Abram and Sarai. They couldn't have kids. Abram and Sarai couldn't have kids. Sarai's womb was barren. We have to remember this about our God. God causes barren wombs to bring forth life. God continues to bring forth life in really, really scary, dry places. God continues to bring forth life out of the darkest of circumstances. This is foundational for us, people. Do you remember something about Easter Sunday? There was a man that was really, really dead, and God resurrected him. God is continually bringing forth new life. I love the name of this congregation. God is continuing to bring forth new life. As we think back on our past, and we think forward then into our future, I hope and pray that we might continue to live into the promise that God is about bringing forth new life. That's a promise, and that's a word of hope for this congregation, but I hope and pray that that is a promise and a word of hope for you. In the midst of some very dark and scary times, in the midst of really some bad news sometimes, in the midst of job loss, and in the midst of relationships that are just upside down, in the midst of really, really difficult times, God is about bringing forth new life. And so as a congregation, we are called, just like Abram, into the dark and scary places to go forth, to step forth, to move forth in faith. God calls Abram to be a blessing to all of those whom he encounters. We follow in the footsteps of Abram, going forth to be a blessing. How are we a blessing? We are a blessing by giving ourselves away to those in need. We are a blessing by journeying with those who are struggling. We are a blessing by loving those who have no name or no voice in this community. As a people of God, we are called to step out in faith. The word that that we're told in in Genesis chapter 12, verse 4, Abraham went as the Lord had told him. The fancy word for that is Abraham lech lakad. Okay, that sounds weird, right? Abraham lech lakad. Say that with me. Lech lakad. Lech lakad. Lech lakad simply means to walk forth in the way. Abraham stepped forth in faith. Lech lakad. New Life Lutheran Church, at its 50th anniversary, I pray, might step forth in faith. And you, in the darkest and scariest and uneasiest moments of your life, I pray that you might step forth in faith. And here's the thing. Abraham never walked alone. As a people of God, New Life Lutheran Church is called to support and encourage and care for and walk with its members. We're called to care for and love and walk with those who are going through really, really hard times. Sometimes we don't do so well at that. But we are called to walk with those people who are journeying in those barren places. And where there is hurt, and where there is disunion, and where there is anger, and where there is hate that bubbles forth, we are called forth to walk with one another. Knowing that God in Jesus Christ walks with us too. Wherever we go, however we go, wherever you and I might step, we walk forth with God. We have a 50-year history of being a place of new life. At our 50th anniversary, it's time for us to live into our namesake and to be a people of blessing, to be a people of hope, to be a people of promise, and to be a people of new life who bless this community walking forth in faith. Several years ago, there was a, don't go to it yet. Several years ago, there was a saying and we found it in some documents, and it was called this, and I have a problem with the title of it at the time. It was called My Church. I have a problem with thinking about this church as my church, because it's not my church, it's not your church, it's Christ's church. Okay? But I like the sentiment of it. And basically what it says is, if this church is and if it can be the best version of itself, then we're called to do and to participate and to move forward in this church. I want to read it for you. This is I reworked some of the language of this church. So simply this church is composed of people like me. We make it what it is. It'll be friendly if I am. This church, its pews will be filled if I help fill them. It'll do great work if I work. It'll make generous gifts to many causes if I'm a generous giver. I will bring other people into its worship and fellowship if I bring them. It'll be a church of loyalty and love, of fearlessness and faith. It'll be a church with a noble spirit if I, who make it what it is, am filled with these. With the help of God, I will dedicate myself to the task of being all the things I hope this church can be. This church, at its 50th anniversary, is called to step out in faith. And we're called to step out in faith as a people of God together. And this church will be all of those wonderful things in and through the power of the Holy Spirit and through your participation. This church is composed of people like me, we make it what it is. If you're willing and if you're able, and if you're energized more about the future of this congregation than its past, and if you are convinced that this church it's not going to die, but it has faith and hope and promise in its future, would you repeat this last phrase with me? With the help of God, I will dedicate myself to the task of being all the things that I hope this church can be. Now, pretend like you really mean it. With the help of God, I will dedicate myself to the task of being all the things that I hope this church can be. Amen. And thanks be to God for our past and for our present and for our future together in faith as New Life Christian Church. Wait, you sing. We sing.